for a closer look at one of the biggest proposed cuts in the president's budget. That's the State Department. Donald Trump's plan would take away $11 billion from the agency. That's nearly 29% of its budget, a move his Secretary of State appears to support.
I think clearly the level of spending that the State Department has been undertaking in the past, in particular in this past year, is simply not sustainable.
Tillerson is currently on a 6-day, 3-nation tour of Asia, his first official trip abroad, where he's already raised some eyebrows with comments he made about finding a new approach to dealing with North Korea. Joining me now is one of the top international affairs experts on our region. Nicholas Burns serves as Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs and Ambassador to NATO under George W. Bush. He's also an ambassador to Greece under Bush and Clinton. He's now professor of the practice of diplomacy and international politics at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Did I confuse the Bushes? I just realized. Did I?
No, you did fine.
Fine. It's great to see you, Ambassador. The extent of my knowledge about foreign policy, to be candid, is having you on my contact list, so I should say. But from afar, it seems to me that Rex Tillerson is less a determinant of foreign policy than Donald Trump's tweets are. Is that an unfair statement from outside?
I think he's in a very tough position. He's a competent person. He ran ExxonMobil, our biggest company. He was there for 40 years. He knows the world. But here's the problem. The Trump administration is divided. You have this very right-wing faction led by Steve Bannon that's economically nationalist. They want to have us pull back from our commitments. They want to have us competing with our allies. They don't want to have us punish Russia too much. And I think Tillerson's trying to find his way forward. He comes from the faction that's more moderate and pragmatic, that includes Secretary of Defense.
But if he's more moderate, then unless Steve Bannon was working his lips today for that, he must know that when people like Mulvaney, the OMB guy, says this is a hard power budget, no mistake about it, no soft power, and translated in English means forget diplomacy, we'll be the tough guys. Rex Tillerson doesn't get that, or he's just required to say what he's required to say?
If you're the President's Secretary of State, you can't disavow the President publicly. But here's the problem with it, Jim. If you cut 1/3 of the budget out of the State Department, this is a relatively small U.S. government agency compared to the Pentagon or Homeland Security, you're going to cripple American diplomacy. We don't have big aircraft carriers to put in mothballs to save money. We have embassies overseas that don't cost a lot of money. And so you need diplomacy when you're trying to be effective in the Middle East, in Europe, and Asia. You can't just rely on the military. And I think
who doesn't get that? I mean, General Mattis, we've all seen the quote, the soundbite 500 times saying in 2013, if you're not going to give me money for that, you better give me more ammunition. Exactly. But everybody understands that, right or left, do they not? So what is this about?
Except for Donald Trump and his budget director.
But to what end?
I think it's part of this agenda that they believe the United States is overextended overseas. We need to pull back. They're not big on alliances. I think alliances like NATO are the great power differential between us and Russia. Republicans in Capitol Hill reacted very negatively. John McCain, Lindsey Graham, lots of people, Marco Rubio, all saying this is DOA, it's dead on arrival. It's not realistic.
You had a responsibility vis-a-vis the Soviet Union when it was the Soviet Union.
I did.
You were young and irresponsible. Can you, putting aside the off-again, on-again bromance between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, Rex Tillerson, what did he receive? The Order of Friendship, or I don't even know what it is.
When he was chairman of ExxonMobil.
Some great honor. Should that trouble those of us who think we have to be wary of Vladimir Putin and Russia, or no?
No, I think he's a sophisticated person. He's a patriot. He understands he's in a completely different job representing us, the American people, and we've got to contain Russian power. Angela Merkel arrives at the White House tomorrow. She and President Trump don't agree on this. She's very tough on Russia. She wants to keep the sanctions on. She knows how to be tough-minded with the Russians. President Trump's trying to be friendly with Putin. It's not going to work.
So if Rex Tillerson is this patriot you described and really competent, then how do you fit into that description the fact that he's chosen to have one woman who has no experience with State Department issues, who works for a conservative publication, being the only press person allowed to travel with him? How does that fit
that MO
you're
It's
describing?
a major mistake. I was one State Department spokesman, so I traveled with the press, with Secretaries of State. Look, there's two things here, Jim. You want the American press with you today in Beijing. You don't want the Chinese press agency to characterize the visit. You want the New York Times and Washington Post, who believe in democratic principles, to do so. Secondly, those of us in government have to respect the First Amendment rights of the press. We have to be accountable. We have to be as transparent as we can to make our democracy work. You take one reporter who's a conservative reporter from a website who doesn't have experience, it doesn't make much sense.
What'd you say in the New York Times about this? You had a great comment about if it turns out we don't have our press, essentially reporting what our Secretary of
That
State
in
is.
an
What's the
autocratic
consequence?
society like China or Russia, they're not free press, will characterize the story and describe your Secretary of State in ways he's not going to want to be described.
Let's add one autocratic society to the list for discussion purposes. Here's Rex Tillerson in Tokyo talking about North Korea today. Here it is.
The diplomatic and other efforts of the past 20 years to bring North Korea to a point of denuclearization have failed. So we have 20 years of failed approach.
Okay, now as a State Department spokesman, you can translate things in English. To me, does that sound like military action is on the horizon, or he's just stating the obvious? What do you take of it?
I think he's stating what all of us believe. President Clinton tried diplomacy. It didn't work. The North Koreans didn't meet their commitments. President George W. Bush tried diplomacy. They didn't meet those commitments either, the North Koreans. So we've got to try something different here.
What is that something different?
It's China. It's to convince the Chinese leadership. They supply all the energy and food. They've got leverage. Convince the Chinese this is a bottom line issue for us. If North Korea develops an ICBM with a nuclear warhead capable of reaching San Francisco and Los Angeles in the next 10 years, and that's entirely possible, that is unacceptable to the United States. China's going to have to use its leverage, and we should make this part of a test of our relationship with Xi Jinping.
Let's talk about, briefly, if we can, about those missiles. So the Senate Intelligence Chairs, bipartisan, stunning, this doesn't happen, joined the House Intelligence Chairs yesterday. They did it today, the House yesterday, saying there's no evidence of this wiretap. So President Trump alleges he was wiretapped by a prior president. No evidence. Even Republicans don't believe it. So when he says in 6 months North Korea has the capacity to reach San Francisco with a missile, and I know that they're about to use it tomorrow. So allies, I need your support to do X. Why should they believe him?
They may not believe him. And this is one of the worst things that Donald Trump has said in 18 months. To accuse President Obama of a felony when there's absolutely no evidence, and he still won't own up to it when the Republicans on the Hill came forward, as you say, Jim, yesterday and said, there's no evidence of this.
Well, Senate
it didn't
Republican
happen.
today, too. Added their voice to it.
And so you've got to have credibility as the American president. If you're not telling the truth on a major issue at home, I don't know if countries overseas are going to rely on what you're saying or be able to read you correctly. And you want to have enough credibility and legitimacy around the world, both to be feared and respected, but also understood.
That deep breath was a sigh, I want to be clear. Ambassador, it's great to see you.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks so much for your time.